Remember Oscar Ringo Bonavena? The wild Argentine boxer that wasn't afraid to run his mouth? His story isn't just about knockouts and trash talk. It's a cautionary tale that pulls back the curtain on boxing's dark side. Think about it. A man who could take punches from Ali and Frazier, brought down by a single bullet at a brothel. This guy wasn't afraid to stir up trouble. In fact, he loved it, once calling Muhammad Ali a black kangaroo and boasting he'd knock him into next week.
He will be shamed to show his face in Argentina after this fight.
I will tell you Monday night in the first clinch we get in. I'm gonna punish you. You will be punished.
But here's the twist. All that tough talk couldn't save him from a situation that cost him his life. What finally silenced this big-mouth fighter for good? Let's get into the chaos that led to Bonavena's tragic downfall.
Introducing from South America, he's wearing blue trunks. He weighs 204, the heavyweight champion of South America, Oscar Ringo Bonavena.
Remember those tough kids from your neighborhood growing up? The ones who always seemed to be looking for trouble? Well, picture a young Oscar Bonavena, all muscle and attitude, prowling the streets of Buenos Aires in the 1950s. This scrappy Italian immigrant's son had something to prove, and he wasn't afraid to let his fists do the talking. Oscar's journey to becoming a world-class boxer didn't start in some fancy gym. It began right there on the streets of Buenos Aires, where he faced down local bullies who pushed him one step too far. It was this diamond in the rough that caught the eye of a local trainer. He saw potential in Oscar that went beyond just another kid with a chip on his shoulder. When Oscar stepped into the ring for his first amateur fights, it was like unleashing a force of nature. The boxing world got his first taste of what would become his trademark style. Wild, unpredictable, and utterly captivating. But Oscar wasn't just about the fighting. This kid had a mouth on him that was almost as dangerous as his fists. One observer called him a heavily muscled boar who wouldn't shut his mouth. And even the greatest himself has said he talks too much. He ran his mouth at every opportunity, daring the world to take notice of him. Now you might think that all this raw talent and natural aggression would have trainers lining up to work with Oscar. But here's the kicker. His early trainers found him about as easy to handle as a live wire. They'd try to refine his technique, to channel all that wild energy into something more controlled. And what did Oscar do? He'd just shrug it off, go right back to doing things his way. It was like trying to tame a hurricane. You could see the potential for greatness there, but getting him to listen was a whole other fight. Despite all the challenges, there was no denying that Oscar Bonavena had something special. At the tender age of 19, he made the leap that would change his life forever. He wasn't just entering the boxing world, he was about to turn it upside down. Picture this, a young Argentine boxer strutting into press conferences, his hair styled like he was the fifth Beatle. That's how Oscar earned the nickname Ringo. But what got people talking was the way he'd run his mouth, insulting champions and calling out opponents like a carnival barker on steroids. You know how some fighters have that one thing that makes them stand out? For Ringo, it was his gift of gab. And boy, did he use it. Remember when he called Muhammad Ali a black kangaroo and a chicken for dodging the draft? That wasn't just trash talk, that was lighting a stick of dynamite and tossing it into the boxing world. Ali, known for his own sharp tongue, was furious. But for Oscar, it was just another day at the office. Some days he'd walk into a restaurant and head straight for the refrigerator, grab a chocolate cream pie and eat what his stomach could hold. He was a mess, abusive of the freedom of fame, and determined to live by his own set of rules. And if you thought that was wild, wait till you hear about the time he dressed up as Santa Claus. Yeah, you heard that right. This guy shows up on the streets, decked out in full Santa gear, and starts challenging sidewalk Santas to fights. It was like a boxing match and a Christmas parade had a baby. And Oscar was right in the middle of it all. His wild lifestyle and taste for chaos wasn't just an act. This guy lived and breathed mayhem. It was like he couldn't help himself. One minute he'd be training for a big fight, the next he'd be causing a scene at a local bar. His reputation as a volatile figure in the sport grew almost as fast as his boxing skills. Some fans couldn't get enough of him, while others, and quite a few promoters, found him too hot to handle. Honestly, by the end of this video, you'll be left wondering how this guy made it alive to 33. His fights became events, spectacles that people couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about who would win or lose anymore. It was about what crazy stunt Oscar would pull next. All this chaos and showmanship caught the eye of American promoters. They saw dollar signs when they looked at him. Here was a guy who could not only fight, but could sell a fight like nobody's business. In a sport where hype is half the battle, Oscar Bonavena was a promoter's dream come true. His early fights in America were a roller coaster. Take his fight against Zora Fali in February 1965. Fali was a highly rated contender, and he showed Ringo the ropes in a one-sided affair. But even when he lost, Oscar found a way to steal the show. His broken English and outrageous statements made him a media darling. Journalists couldn't get enough of him.
Why nervioso? It's Monday. Examination. I see you.
Win or lose, Oscar was always good for a headline. He'd strut into press conferences, spewing wild claims and insults that had reporters scrambling for their notepads. Remember how he needled Joe Frazier? Oscar showed up to a presser, started sniffing the air, and then gagged like he'd smelled something awful. The implication? Smokin' Joe had a personal hygiene problem. It was outrageous, disrespectful, and pure Ringo. Enter legendary trainers like Charlie Goldman and Gil Clancy. These guys had molded champions before, and they thought they could do the same with Oscar. But he'd nod along, agree to everything, then step into the ring and revert to his wild, swinging style. Despite his inconsistency, there was something about him that kept people coming back for more. Maybe it was the raw power in his fists. Maybe it was the way he could electrify a crowd with a single punch or a well-timed insult. Whatever it was, Bonavena had that it factor that you can't teach. His fighting style was unlike anything else in the heavyweight division: rugged, wild swinging, durable. Critics would say he was all brawn and no brain in the ring, but that's exactly what made him so dangerous. You never knew what Oscar was going to do next, which leads us to our next brawl. Let's start with the Frazier fights. It's September 21st, 1966, and the boxing world is buzzing. Frazier's the rising star, undefeated and hungry. Bonavena, he's the wild card, the guy nobody's quite sure about. In the second round, Bonavena unleashes that raw power we've heard so much about. Boom! Frazier hits the canvas. Twice! 2 knockdowns against Smokin' Joe Frazier? Who saw that coming? But Frazier, showing the heart of a champion, picks himself up. When the final bell rings, the decision goes to Frazier, but Oscar's shown he can hang with the best.
The winner by a split decision, Joe Frazier. Joe Frazier coming over to our microphone will miss.
They clash again in 1968.
1968. Smoking Joe Frazier is making the second defense of his heavyweight championship in his hometown of Philadelphia.
This time, Oscar tries a different approach. He's more defensive, trying to outsmart Frazier rather than overpower him. But Joe's ready for him. The beating Oscar takes is so severe, it becomes the stuff of boxing lore. There's a photo from that night that made it into Ring magazine. One look at Oscar's battered mug, and you'll understand why they call boxing the cruelest sport. But the real test, the one that would define Oscar Bonavena's legacy, was yet to come. December 7th, 1970, Madison Square Garden. In one corner, the Louisville Lip himself, Muhammad Ali. In the other, our Argentine wildman. This isn't just any fight. It's Ali's return after 3.5 years away from the sport. The eyes of the world are watching.
He's the champion who has been labeled the fastest moving heavyweight in the entire history of 1 century of world heavyweight champion.
I wouldn't want to do too much bragging about it, but everybody that watches me fight or everybody that has witnessed one of my bouts, they say that I am the greatest that they've ever seen.
For 14 rounds, Ringo gives Ali all he can handle. Even in the face of Ali's legendary trash talk, he gives as good as he gets. The garden's electric, the crowd on the edge of their seats. Could Bonavena be the one to tarnish Ali's perfect record?
Going right at it. Ringo in the blue trunks with the red waistband, Ali in the red trunks with the white waistband.
Then comes the 15th round. Ali, sensing victory, pours it on. He drops Oscar 3 times. The referee waves it off. TKO victory for Ali. But here's where it gets interesting. In the heat of the moment, Ali doesn't go to a neutral corner as the rules require. He's right there, ready to pounce as soon as Oscar gets up. It's controversial, sure, but it's also pure Ali, always pushing the boundaries, always finding a way to win. Even in defeat, Oscar earned something that night: respect. He went toe-to-toe with the greatest of all time and lasted until the final round. That's not something many fighters can claim. Patrick Connor, a respected boxing historian, put it this way: Ali saw the Bonavena fight as a necessary step to prepare for his upcoming clash with Frazier. Think about that for a second. Ali, the greatest of all time, used Oscar Bonavena as a prep fight. Not because he thought he was easy pickings, but because he knew he was tough enough, durable enough to get him ready for Frazier. We've all seen people go crazy in the name of love. Heck, maybe even you yourself have done some questionable things for the sake of romance. But have you ever conspired to kill for your lover? Or to kill with your lover? Our boy Bonavena has. And it all started at a place called the Mustang Ranch. To resurrect his career, Oscar moved to Reno, Nevada, to promote a series of fights and to train on the property of local pimp and gangster Joe Conforte, who ran the infamous Mustang Ranch with his madam wife, Sally. It was the first legal brothel in the United States and was run by an Italian couple with alleged ties to the mob. Sally, daughter of a prostitute, and Joe, your average wannabe mafioso type, seemed like the ideal couple, combining brains, brawn, and breasts. But the Mustang Ranch wasn't just any old brothel. This place was legendary, and not in a good way. It was the kind of joint where the lines between legal and illegal got real blurry, real fast. Right in the middle of it all was our boy Bonavena and his urge to fly into Sally's flame, who was 26 years older than him. Talk about a cougar. He and Sally, who had white hair and swollen legs, showed up in the papers as the Beauty and the Beast, and local journalists hinted at a love affair. It was March 1976 when she became Oscar's manager. But let's be real, that was just a fancy word for what was really going on. These two were playing with fire, and they knew it. The affair between Oscar and Sally became the worst-kept secret in boxing. Everyone knew, but no one dared say a word. These two took the phrase partners in crime literally. They were plotting, scheming, trying to find a way out from under Joe's thumb. They even talked about taking Joe out of the picture, permanently. This wasn't some pulp novel. This was real life, with real consequences. To make matters worse, Oscar once pointed a shotgun at Joe. Sure, it turned out to be empty, but can you imagine the tension in that room? It was like a powder keg just waiting for a spark. He even bragged about taking over the Mustang Ranch. The whole situation was a ticking time bomb. Joe gave him an ultimatum: leave with Sally or face the music. But Oscar wasn't the kind of man to back down from a fight, even when he should have. As Ringo's star faded in the ring, it seemed to shine brighter at the Mustang Ranch. He became a fixture there, more at home among the working girls and high rollers than he ever was in the gym. The man who once had the world at his feet was now knee-deep in a world of danger. Ringo plunged into a whirlwind of lovemaking and mayhem, and he wouldn't make it out alive. Boxing insiders watched in disbelief. Here was a guy who could have been one of the greats, throwing it all away for a dangerous hookup and a taste of the high life. But that was Ringo, always living on the edge, always pushing his luck. You know how they say luck runs out for those who push it too far? Well, on May 22nd, 1976, Oscar Bonavena's number finally came up. And let me tell you, it wasn't pretty. Picture this. It's a chilly Nevada night, the kind that makes you pull your collar up tight. Oscar's on a losing streak, throwing money away at the gambling tables. But that's not enough for him. No, he's got to take it one step further. So what does he do? He heads over to the Mustang Ranch. Now, if you're thinking, hey, isn't that the place where he's been causing all sorts of trouble? You'd be right on the money. Oscar's got one thing on his mind: Sally, Joe Conforte's wife. The same Joe who owns the Mustang Ranch and isn't exactly known for his forgiving nature. As Oscar approaches the ranch, the air feels electric with tension. That's when Willard Ross Brymer, ex-convict and Mustang Ranch security guard, steps in, a bolt-action rifle in his hands. Two men, both with something to prove, squaring off in the darkness. Witnesses later said Oscar tried to talk to Brymer. But here's where it gets messy. Oscar, in a moment of sheer madness, reaches for a revolver stashed in his boot. The metal glints in the dim light, and time seems to slow down. Before anyone could blink, a single shot rang out. Brymer had pulled the trigger, and just like that, the man who'd gone toe-to-toe with Ali and Frazier was down for the count. 58 wins, 44 knockouts, and 1 bullet. These numbers tell the story of a boxer who could take any punch but couldn't dodge the bullet with his name on it. It hit Oscar right in the heart. He didn't stand a chance. Brymer later claimed he only meant to fire a warning shot, but whether it was intentional or not, the result was the same. Oscar Bonavena, the wild child of boxing, was gone in an instant. When it comes to love, we've all heard the phrase, "I'd die for you." Heck, maybe even you yourself have said it to the woman of your dreams. But Oscar took that phrase literally, and his death wasn't just the end of his story, it was the beginning of a whole new mystery. People started talking, and when people talk about a death at a notorious brothel, things get complicated real fast. Conspiracy theories started flying. Some folks were convinced that Joe Conforte had orchestrated the whole thing. After all, Oscar had been getting a little too cozy with his wife. The mystery of his death would continue to captivate for years to come. The aftermath was like something out of a crime novel. The world was still reeling from the shock of Ringo's death when the legal circus rolled into town. And let me tell you, this was the main event. Let's set the scene. Willard Ross Brymer, the security guard who pulled the trigger, is sitting in the hot seat. The prosecution's revving up for a knockout, but something's off. It's like watching a fixed fight where you can see the punches aren't landing quite right. Now, Big Boss Joe steps into the ring to testify. He's singing the blues about how he regrets letting Bonavena crash at his place. Says Ringo got real chummy with his wife. Talk about airing your dirty laundry in public, right? But here's the kicker. It's like he's trying to paint himself as the victim in all this. Can you believe it? The trial takes a wild turn, and before you know it, Brymer's pleading no contest to involuntary manslaughter. It's like watching a heavyweight bout end with a light tap on the chin. And get this, Brymer gets sentenced to a measly 15 months in the slammer. 15 months for taking out one of boxing's wildest characters. This sent Argentina into an uproar, its citizens demanding justice for their slain hero. It was like the whole world was crying foul, but the ref just wasn't listening. Now listen to this. Wild Bonavena, cougar chaser, player, brothel lover, had a wife. Shocking. But you know, not really, since he was having an affair. Anyway, she wasn't about to throw in the towel. She comes out swinging with a wrongful death suit, gunning for a cool $7 million. She's got Joe Conforte and Brymer in her sights, looking to land a haymaker for justice. You'd think with all the hullabaloo, this case would be a slam dunk, right? Wrong. It's like watching a boxer dance around the ring, never landing that knockout punch. The Confortes slip away on some legal technicality. As the dust settled, people started asking questions. Was Brymer just a fall guy? What about Joe Conforte's role in all this? Some folks whispered that maybe, just maybe, his influence reached further than the Mustang Ranch. That perhaps he had friends in high places, pulling strings behind the scenes. But we'll never know, because Joe Conforte died in 2019 and took his secrets with him to the grave. What we're left with is a tragedy worthy of Shakespeare, played out in the neon-lit world of Nevada's underbelly. A fallen boxer, a brothel owner with secrets, and a justice system that seemed to drop the ball harder than a rookie taking his first hit from Mike Tyson. The boxing world was left reeling, feeling like they just watched their champ go down in a fixed fight. But Bonavena's recklessness left behind him a trail of self-destruction that ended violently. This is what happens to the almost greats of boxing. The ones who had the talent, the grit, but never quite reached the summit. He's a perfect example of how the sport remembers its fallen heroes, with a mix of admiration, regret, and a whole lot of what-ifs. In Argentina, Bonavena's memory still packs a punch. When he died, thousands flooded the streets to say goodbye. Former Argentine President Alejandro Lanús showed up to pay his respects. That's the kind of send-off usually reserved for national heroes, not guys who got gunned down at a brothel. But that's Ringo for you, larger than life, even in death. Ask the boxing historians about Bonavena, and you'll get a debate. Was he great? Was he just good? It's like trying to score a close fight. Everyone's got an opinion. Most agree he was a significant heavyweight of the 60s and 70s, but whether he belongs in the pantheon of all-time greats, that's where the arguments start. But here's the thing about Ringo. His fights against Ali and Frazier are still required viewing for any serious boxing fan. Imagine you're a young fighter, trying to learn the ropes. Your coach sits you down in front of a grainy old TV and says, "Watch this. This is how you stand toe-to-toe with legends." That's the Bonavena effect. He might not have won those fights, but he sure as hell made his mark. Of course, it's hard to talk about him without mentioning that tragic night at the Mustang Ranch. His personal life often overshadows what he did in the ring. It's like trying to appreciate a masterpiece painting with a big ugly stain right in the middle. You can still see the brilliance, but man, that stain catches your eye every time. Bonavena's story has become a bit of a cottage industry. Books, documentaries, movies, they all dig into the darker side of his life and the seedy underbelly of boxing. It's like we can't get enough of the tragedy. Maybe it's because deep down we all love a good fallen hero story about the connections between the sport and organized crime. It's like Ringo landed one last haymaker on the boxing world, even after he was gone. In the end, Ringo's legacy is as complicated as the man himself. He's remembered as a talented brawler who could hang with the best, a colorful character who lit up press conferences, and a cautionary tale about the pitfalls of fame. His story is a reminder that in boxing, as in life, the most compelling tales often come from those who almost made it to the top. Bonavena's life and death shine a light on some pretty heavy issues in the boxing world. Are we doing enough to look after these guys once the final bell rings? When the cheers fade and the lights go down, what's left for our fallen gladiators? What do you think? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. And if you like this video, don't forget to click the subscribe button so we can continue making boxing content like this. See you in the next one.